I'd driven past the old mansion hundreds of times, always wondering what stories its cracked walls could tell. Its grand but decaying structure peeked out from behind gnarled trees and a rusty gate. I'd tried to find something about it online, but it was like the house didn't exist. No owner, no recent sales, no history. Just a shadowy outline that sat there. One rainy Friday night, after months of joking about going in, I finally convinced my friend Matt to join me. Matt was always up for a thrill, and his eagerness somehow made me feel braver. It wasn't about breaking in or vandalizing anything. We just wanted to look around, maybe spot a fragment of history. When we arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The house loomed ahead of us, shadowed and silent. The gate let out a long, mournful creak as we pushed it open, sending a flock of crows scattering from a nearby tree. As we walked up to the house, I kept expecting someone to peer down at us from one of the windows. We reached the front steps, and the house seemed to swallow us in a silence so complete it felt like stepping into another world. I looked at Matt, who flashed me a reassuring grin before pushing open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, carrying a faint, musty scent. Dust coated everything, giving the place a silvery, otherworldly quality, and sheets draped over the furniture made it feel like we'd stumbled into a tomb. "All right," Matt said. "Let's see what we're working with." We started exploring room by room, moving through the grand parlor, where a crystal chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its once glittering jewels dulled by dust. In the dining room, an ornate table stretched nearly the length of the room, each chair positioned perfectly, as though an invisible dinner party were about to begin. I tried to focus on my surroundings, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. My nerves prickled with each step, as if invisible eyes were watching. Then, as we moved into the hallway, my flashlight caught something in the corner of my eye. A figure, white and motionless, standing in the dimly lit room ahead. "Matt, do you see that?" I whispered, not daring to move. He nodded, squinting into the darkness. The figure was draped in a flowing white dress, and for a moment I thought it might just be a mannequin left behind by the previous owners. But there was something wrong with its posture. Something unsettling about the way it stood, rigid and unnatural. We took a few tentative steps closer, trying to get a better look, but before we could get too close, the figure suddenly vanished, slipping out of sight around the corner. Matt looked at me. "Did you see that?" My gut was practically begging me to leave, but curiosity held me in place. We hurried to the next room, searching for any sign of the figure. The air felt colder here. Just as we were about to give up, a soft giggle echoed through the hallway, faint but unmistakable. It sounded childlike, almost playful, and it seemed to come from the next room. "Hello?" Matt called out, his voice wavering. "Is someone there?" Silence. I could feel my skin prickling. We moved down a narrow corridor. It led to a sweeping staircase, which spiraled up into the darkness. At the top of the stairs, I thought I saw the flash of white fabric disappear around a corner. "Let's check upstairs," Matt suggested, though his voice sounded less certain than before. We climbed the staircase, the wood creaking underfoot. I couldn't help but look over my shoulder every few seconds. When we reached the top, we found ourselves in a long hallway lined with doors, each one slightly ajar, as if waiting for us. Matt pointed to a door at the end of the hall, the only one that was closed. "Let's check that one." As we passed each door, I felt an overwhelming urge to look inside, but something held me back, an instinct warning me to keep moving. The door at the end of the hall was larger than the others, with a tarnished brass handle and faded letters spelling out, "Nursery." Matt shot me a nervous grin. Well, this should be interesting. He pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a rocking chair by the window. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the dim light from the window. But there on the floor were fresh footprints, leading from the rocking chair to the door. I backed away. "Matt, we need to leave, man." He didn't argue this time. As we turned to go, I caught a glimpse of movement in the doorway. A figure in white, standing perfectly still, her face hidden by a veil of dark hair. My stomach clenched as she took a single step forward. We bolted, racing down the hall and stumbling down the staircase. We finally found the front door and burst outside. We didn't stop running until we reached the gate. On the drive back, none of us said much. We'd come out here looking for a thrill, maybe a little taste of adventure. But instead, we'd brushed up against something that didn't feel right. We hadn't brought anything back with us, nothing haunted or cursed. But there was a shift, a quiet understanding that had settled over us. Over the next few days, the experience replayed in my mind. Every detail, from the flash of white disappearing around corners to that strange, distant giggle, felt as vivid as when we first saw it. The whole mansion had felt alive in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't like I'd brought the feeling back with me, but it had left a lasting impact. I could sense it, like the way you know a storm's coming by the weight in the air. We'd taken that trip for fun, and we'd left with a newfound respect for the unknown. Whatever was in that house, whoever she was, had made it clear we weren't welcome. And maybe after that night we didn't need to be. The thrill of exploring places like that was still there, but it came with caution now, a line I knew I wouldn't cross again. Sometimes things are abandoned for a reason, and sometimes it's best to let them stay that way. Abandoned places had always been a fascination of mine, so when my girlfriend Mia heard about this manor, an estate left to rot on the town's border, we couldn't resist checking it out. The house had its fair share of local legends, mostly about how it was abandoned after a tragedy, though no one could seem to agree on what happened. Some folks said a fire drove the owners out, others whispered about something darker, a murder, or maybe something worse. Mia's family had known about it for years, but no one dared to explore. That was all the motivation we needed. We pulled up the long, winding driveway at dusk. The place was massive, with vines of ivy weaving their way up the stone walls and broken windows. "Are you sure about this?" Mia asked as she cut the engine. She looked up at the house, her expression a mix of excitement and nerves. "Come on, we didn't come all this way just to chicken out now." She gave a shaky laugh, grabbing her camera from the back seat. "Right, it's just bigger than I expected." "Well, let's go meet the ghosts," I joked, opening my door. She rolled her eyes, but followed, and together we made our way up to the front door. It hung slightly open, as if inviting us in. The wood warped from years of neglect. I pushed it open, and the creak echoed through the dark hallway inside. Mia clicked on her flashlight, sweeping it around the foyer. Dust motes floated in the beam, and the air smelled of mildew and something older. Something that made me think the stories we'd heard might have a little truth to them. "Guess no one's been here in a while," Mia muttered, snapping a picture of the crumbling wallpaper. "Imagine what this place must have been like back in the day. Probably full of life, music, parties," I said, picturing people in elegant clothes laughing and mingling in the rooms around us. But now it was just shadows and silence. We wandered through rooms, each one emptier and more decayed than the last. Faded portraits of stern-looking aristocrats lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow us as we passed. Finally, we reached what looked like the ballroom. It was a massive room with a vaulted ceiling and a wall of grimy windows that let in just enough twilight to cast everything in a gloomy half-light. And there, in the center, sat a grand piano, its polished wood long faded, and its keys yellowed by time. "That must be the famous piano," Mia whispered, approaching it like she was afraid it might spring to life. She ran her fingers along the keys, raising a cloud of dust. "Don't suppose you know how to play?" I teased. She smirked. "Only if you want me to play chopsticks." "Guess that's not happening then," I said. But I couldn't resist. I reached out and pressed one of the keys. A single hollow note echoed through the room, sending a strange, uneasy thrill through me. Still in tune, I muttered, though I wasn't sure why that bothered me. Mia seemed equally unsettled, her gaze fixed on something on the piano. I followed her stare and saw a handprint, small, like a child's, smudged in the dust over the keys. "Did you do that?" Mia asked. "No," I replied. "It's probably just old dust that got disturbed or something." I didn't really believe it, but I was hoping she would. We both backed away, looking around as if expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "Let's keep moving," Mia suggested, already heading for the door. I couldn't have agreed faster. We turned to leave, but before we made it halfway across the room, a single deep note rang out from the piano behind us, echoing off the walls in the empty space. Mia grabbed my arm. "You're messing with me, right?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. We turned slowly, both staring at the piano, but it was still. The keys were untouched, yet the sound lingered, hauntingly clear. I tried to laugh it off, forcing a smile. Maybe it's just the old wood settling or something. You know how old houses are. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded, and we kept walking. We were almost to the door when Mia stopped, her flashlight fixed on the far end of the room. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "See what?" She pointed, her hand trembling. "By the door I thought I saw someone standing there." I looked, squinting into the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, and the faint outline of the doorway. "Probably just your mind playing tricks," I said, though I wasn't so sure myself. Still, I put a hand on her shoulder, steering her toward the exit. "Come on, let's get out of here." But as we stepped into the hallway, I felt that strange feeling that's hard to describe, like someone was watching us. I looked back, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure, a tall, thin silhouette, standing by the piano. We made our way through the mansion in silence, neither of us daring to speak. The hallways seemed darker now, as if the house itself was pushing us out. Every step echoed louder than the last. "Do you think maybe this was a mistake?" Mia asked. I wanted to tell her no, that it was fine, that we were just scaring ourselves, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. "Let's just get to the car," I muttered, picking up the pace. We reached the foyer, and just as I stepped out onto the front porch, I heard a soft, faint whisper echoing from somewhere deep inside the house. It was too quiet to make out the words, but that little bit was enough to chill me to the bone. "Did you hear that?" Mia asked, her eyes wide. "Let's go. Now." We practically ran to the car, throwing ourselves inside and locking the doors. Mia was breathing hard, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. "What was that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I replied, staring back at the mansion. There was nothing there, just the dark, empty windows, staring back at us. Mia took a shaky breath, starting the car. "We're not coming back here. Ever." "Agreed," I said, and we pulled away. Maybe we were just paranoid, but whatever was in that place, it felt like it didn't want us there. The piano notes stayed with me long after, echoing in my head. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought I heard it again. A single lingering note, soft and distant, almost like a memory. It's funny how places can leave a mark on you, like they've reached into your mind and claimed a part of you, something that follows you even when you think you've left it behind. And in the quiet moments, when I'm alone, I sometimes imagine myself back in that ballroom. I picture the dusty keys, the handprint that hadn't been there before, and I wonder, was it a warning or simply a call, pulling us back to something we'd never be able to understand? I was a nurse at a small-town hospital, the kind of place where you're bound to bump into someone you know, whether it's a patient, a doctor, or a staff member on your shift. It had a comforting, homey feel most days, but it had its oddities too. The top floor was one of them. That was where they used to keep the psychiatric ward, a place shrouded in local myths and unsettling stories. For years it had been closed off, locked away like a secret better left forgotten. We'd all heard the stories, even if some pretended not to believe them. Tales about shadows moving at the end of the hall, cold drafts in warm rooms, and whispers echoing through empty hallways. But it was all just talk, right? A little something to keep things interesting during the long, late-night shifts. At least that's what I thought. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I'd overheard the janitor mentioning a loose lock on the door to the ward, how it kept coming undone no matter how many times he'd tried to secure it. It was a Friday night, and things were quiet, with most of the patients sleeping peacefully and nothing else to keep my mind busy. I knew if I was ever going to satisfy my curiosity, this was the time. I grabbed my flashlight and took the stairs up to the top floor, each step echoing loudly in the silence. When I reached the landing, I saw the hallway stretching before me, dim and unsettling. The door to the psychiatric ward was closed, a sign reading, "Ward closed," hanging crookedly on the handle, like a final warning. I paused, feeling an unexpected tightness in my chest. My mind was already filling with images of the empty rooms and the patients who had once been here. This was where they had sent those who needed extra attention, people who were difficult, as the older nurses would say. I took a deep breath and pressed forward, convincing myself it was just a quick look, a chance to put the stories to rest once and for all. My hand reached for the doorknob, and with a twist it gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a pitch-black corridor lined with doors on either side, leading to the ward itself. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside, the beam cutting through the dust and revealing faded walls with chipped paint. Every surface seemed coated in a thin layer of grime, the air heavy with the smell of mold and stale antiseptic. Old peeling posters lined the walls, their cheerful messages about hope and recovery feeling strangely hollow in the abandoned space. As I walked further, my footsteps seemed to echo louder than usual, the sound bouncing off the empty walls. I passed room after room, each one like a forgotten time capsule. Some had unmade beds with yellowed sheets, others held furniture covered in dust and debris. A few rooms even had personal items, forgotten slippers, an old robe, a battered stuffed bear lying in the corner with one glass eye missing. My curiosity pushed me to keep going, even as a faint unease settled over me. Finally, I reached the end of the hallway, where a reinforced door marked Ward A loomed before me. Unlike the other doors, this one was intact, sealed shut and solid. The door had scratches around the edges, deep marks that looked like they'd been made by desperate fingers clawing at the wood. I ran my fingers over the grooves, wondering who had left them and what they had been trying to escape. As I stood there lost in thought, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from somewhere down the hall. It was barely audible at first, like the distant sound of raindrops on a window. I turned, shining my flashlight back the way I'd come, but the hallway was empty. The tapping grew louder, echoing down the corridor, as if someone were knocking on a door just around the corner. I hesitated, feeling a prickling on the back of my neck, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I took slow, careful steps, following the sound as it led me back down the hall. The tapping grew louder, filling the silence with an eerie rhythm that seemed to echo through the entire ward. I stopped at one of the doors and pressed my ear against it, listening. The tapping stopped, replaced by a soft scratching sound, like fingernails scraping against wood. The noise sent a shiver through me, and I backed away, scanning the hallway with my flashlight. The scratching continued, relentless, like someone trying to scratch their way through the door. I turned to leave, deciding I'd had enough of my little exploration, but then I heard something else. A voice, distant, coming from somewhere further down the hall. "Help me." The words were barely a whisper. I froze, every muscle tensing as I listened, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. The hall was empty, the doors all shut, but the voice continued, growing louder and more desperate. "Please, help me." I took a step back, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I scanned the hallway. I didn't know if it was my imagination or something else, but I felt like someone was watching me, lurking just out of sight. The voice continued, echoing down the corridor, pulling me back toward the reinforced door at the end of the hall. I tried to steady my breathing. This was just an empty ward, abandoned years ago. There was no one here, no reason to be afraid. But as I stood there, staring at the door with the scratched edges, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I took a step forward. The voice had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. I reached the door and pressed my ear against it. For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard it again, a soft, barely audible whisper. "Help me." I stumbled back, my heart racing as I scanned the hallway. The voice was right there, just on the other side of the door. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, but it was locked tight. I shook the handle, desperate to open the door, to see what was inside, but it wouldn't budge. As I stood there struggling with the door, I heard it again. The sound of laughter, faint and childlike, echoing down the hallway. I turned, my flashlight shaking as I scanned the darkness. But there was no one there. The laughter grew louder, filling the corridor. "Please let me out." The voice was back, desperate and pleading, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I backed away, my heart pounding as the laughter grew louder, mingling with the desperate cries. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, caught between two worlds, one of laughter, one of despair. I stumbled back down the hallway, trying to find my way out. The laughter followed me, echoing through the empty halls until it felt like it was right beside me, whispering in my ear. I broke into a run, my footsteps echoing in the silence as I raced down the corridor. I didn't stop until I reached the door at the end of the hall, fumbling with the handle as I threw it open and burst into the stairwell. But even then, I could still hear it. The faint sound of laughter, echoing down the hallway, and the desperate voice pleading for help. I never went back to the old ward after that night. I never dared to doubt the stories about the ward again. Now I had a story of my own. The experience left me with a chill that lingered, the kind that makes you second-guess every shadow in an empty hallway. When I finally worked up the nerve to tell the older nurses about what I'd experienced, they shared a knowing look. One of them, a quiet woman named Helen, leaned in closer. "You've heard her too, haven't you?" "Her?" I asked, feeling an unsettling weight settle over me. She said, "There was a young woman decades ago. She was kept in that very ward, room 306. She didn't make it out, and some say she's still there, trying to get someone's attention. Those taps and faint cries, that's her calling out, they say, hoping someone will finally listen." Another nurse, Marcy, who'd been at the hospital for over 30 years, added, "You're not the first to hear her, you know? A few of us, especially those who work the night shift, have had encounters. Little things, a flickering light, that tapping sound, or sometimes even footsteps when you know you're alone." Helen's words stayed with me, and from that night on, every creak of the old building, every draft that slipped through, seemed a little more menacing. The hospital, once a place of safety and healing, had taken on a new layer for me, a place that held secrets and restless echoes from a past that refused to stay buried. And though I'd never admit it out loud, there were nights when I felt compelled to pause by the door of the old ward, as if something beyond my understanding wanted me to listen to acknowledge its presence. This happened to me back in October 2015. My girlfriend, Sailor, and I had this habit of exploring forgotten places. It wasn't that we were adrenaline junkies or anything, but there was something about abandoned buildings, that eerie stillness and sense of lost time that pulled us in. The thrill of walking into a place that had been untouched for years, maybe even decades, gave us a weird sense of excitement. That's probably how we ended up in front of that old, decrepit farmhouse one October afternoon. We had seen it from the road countless times on our weekend drives out of town, a skeletal structure standing out against the fields and leafless trees. It looked out of place, with peeling paint and broken windows, but it had a kind of forlorn charm that made it hard to ignore. I remember slowing down the car and looking at Sailor. She was already smiling, her eyes sparkling with that mischievous look that always meant trouble. "Should we?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I grinned. "Let's do it." We parked the car a few hundred feet away and made our way up the overgrown path. Weeds and brambles snagged at our jeans as we walked. The house loomed above us, its warped wooden boards groaning in the wind. Sailor took out her phone, snapping a few pictures as we approached, while I took in the scene. It was strange to think that this had once been someone's home. As we got closer, the eeriness settled in. Every window was either broken or boarded up. The porch was sagging, creaking under our weight as we cautiously made our way forward. Sailor looked at me, her face a mix of excitement and apprehension. "You go first," she whispered, nudging me. I pushed open the door, and it swung open with a loud groan. The inside was a mess. Dust, debris, and remnants of what must have been furniture littered the floor. It was as if whoever had lived here had left in a hurry, abandoning everything. Broken dishes were scattered across the floor, an overturned chair lay in the corner, and a tarnished mirror hung crookedly on the wall, reflecting nothing but shadows. Sailor followed me in, her footsteps barely audible over the creaking floorboards. We wandered through the rooms, taking in the decay and silence. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, stained with mildew and age. Faded family portraits hung on the walls, their faces blurred by dust and neglect. The whole place felt like a snapshot from a forgotten time, preserved in decay. After a while, we found ourselves in the kitchen, where an old stove and a rusted refrigerator sat like relics from a different era. Sailor pointed at the broken window above the sink, through which we could see the expanse of fields stretching out into the horizon. "Imagine living here," she said. I was trying to picture it. The laughter of kids running through the fields, dinners at this dusty old table. But something about the place felt wrong, like it was steeped in sadness. I brushed the feeling off as my imagination playing tricks. We continued our exploration, heading upstairs. The staircase was narrow and creaked with every step, and I kind of expected it to collapse beneath us. The second floor was just as dilapidated as the first. There were a few bedrooms, revealing moldy mattresses and broken furniture. Sailor wandered into one room, running her fingers over an old vanity covered in a thick layer of dust. "This place is seriously creepy," she said with a nervous chuckle. I laughed, but there was an unease creeping into my chest. There was a sense of stillness, a heaviness, like we were intruding on something we shouldn't be. I shrugged it off, trying to focus on the thrill of discovery. As we explored, Sailor took more photos, documenting our adventure. We had just entered the last room when she paused, her phone still raised. "Did you see that?" she asked. She pointed to the window across the room. "I thought I saw someone, a face or something, upstairs when we were outside." I turned to the window and stared out, but there was nothing there, just the empty field stretching out in the dying light. I shook my head, trying to brush off the unease creeping in. "It's probably just shadows," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Sailor didn't look convinced, but she agreed. We finished our exploration quickly after that, and by the time we made it back downstairs, the sun was setting. We made our way to the car in silence, both caught up in our own minds. That night, as we reviewed the photos, we saw it. A face, staring out from one of the upstairs windows in a photo Sailor had taken of the house from the road. It was barely visible, just a faint outline in the dust-streaked glass, but it was there, watching us. We looked at each other, and Sailor laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "It's probably just a trick of the light," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. But I think we both knew it wasn't a trick. The next day, we couldn't resist. We decided to go back, hoping to debunk what we'd seen. It was daylight this time, and the house didn't seem quite as menacing, but as we approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The face in the window kept creeping into my thoughts. We walked up to the front door. I felt a chill as we entered, the musty air wrapping around us like a shroud. We climbed the stairs to the second floor. We went straight to the room where we'd seen the face, but it was empty, just as decayed and abandoned as before. The window was cracked and dusty, and as I looked out, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching us from this very spot. Then, Sailor gasped, grabbing my arm. "Look!" She pointed at the floor by the window. There in the dust was a single set of footprints, leading to the window and back toward the door. They were fresh, the dust disturbed as if someone had stood there, watching, and then turned away. We stood there, frozen, staring at the footprints in disbelief. Sailor took a step back. "We should go," she whispered. I agreed, unable to take my eyes off the footprints. We hurried out of the room and made our way back to the stairs, but as we reached the top of the staircase, we heard a faint creak, like someone subtly moving on the floorboards behind us. We turned, but the hallway was empty. Without another word, we raced down the stairs. We kept walking straight to the front door without stopping. We didn't look back after that. We practically sprinted to the car, throwing ourselves inside and slamming the doors shut. As I started the engine, Sailor looked back at the house. "Did you see it?" she whispered. We drove away in silence, leaving the house behind us. The memory of those footprints and that face stuck with me. And sometimes, when I pass by that dark window, I swear I see it again. Pale, expressionless, watching. I honestly don't know if it was someone or something inside that house, but one thing's for sure, we hadn't been alone in there. If these abandoned building tales made you shiver, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life horror. Got a spooky exploration story of your own? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear your haunting encounters. And remember, when exploring the unknown, stay sharp. Some things might just be waiting for you to look away. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.